All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live, episode number 23 today on Christ Over Fear. I'm your host, Chad Jenkins, and today we get to have a very special guest on the show here, July 6th, 2022, the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, Alton McCallum. So Alton was a teammate of mine at West Point's prep school, and then as well as 4 years at West Point as a running back and tight end for the Army Black Knights. Then he went on and he served in the Army, the United States Army, as a field artillery officer. He actually did just over 10 years in the Army. So he got out in 2013. And then after that, I think he was located in Texas. So he stayed in Texas, worked with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in Texas as an area director. He also, during that time frame, went ahead and got his master's in counseling, mental health counseling. So he's a licensed professional counselor. So can't wait to talk to him about that. He's in Belton, Texas now. He's the chaplain for the Belton Police Department, as well as a mental health counselor and the founder of that counseling organization that he started, which I believe was 5 years ago as well, Insight Counseling Center. So can't wait to have him on. He's the special guest for today. We did come on. We did a quick commo check, and we do have each other live on the shot. And we have not talked to each other or seen each other since June 1st, 2002. There he is. Alton, what's up, man?
Not too much, Chad. How you doing?
I'm really excited because I get to see you and I get to catch up. And it makes me realize that while it can be like, that many years and I can see your face and now we're together again on this show, how awesome that is. But it also makes me actually stop and reflect for a second that I need to make a more concerted effort to touch base with guys like you that are impactful in my life, that were so impactful then in my life, and that it can be like 20 years, because now I guess we're coming up on our 20th anniversary, and need to stay in touch with guys like you because you're impactful and you continue to be impactful. And we've actually talked about you numerous times on this show, which I don't know that you know. So how's it going?
It's good, man. Can't complain. Life is well.
How was the 4th of July?
I was good. Got to really relax. Got a lot of work that I'm kind of doing now, but definitely was able to relax, enjoy family, and kind of just reminisce about things about this country. So definitely some good time.
Yeah. Now, how long have you settled in Belton, Texas then? Is that after because you got out at Fort Hood, or what was that like out of the military?
Yeah. So my last duty section was Fort Hood, retired out, medically retired out in 2013, moved into Belton in 2012, and we've been here and kind of been establishing some roots and been enjoying Texas. Never thought I would, but enjoy. Yeah,
because let's let the audience know you're a Maryland guy through and through. So we can't let that pass without. Let's not let everybody think that you're a Texas through and through, right?
Yeah, man. I'm an East Coast guy. I still love the East Coast, but Texas is where I found to be home right now. So
there you go. Now, your wife and family. How many kids do you have, Alton?
So I have 4 kids, man. I have my oldest is Alton the third. He's 15. The next is David, Isaiah, and he's 12. My daughter Eden, Victoria is 9, and then my youngest is Malachi, which is 2. So
all right. So
3
boys, 1 girl.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she's like she's third on the list, so she's got 2 older and 1 younger to follow her through. Well played, dude.
Yeah, no, right? Yeah. Good
play. Yeah, excellent work on that. Well, hey, this show, I know you've tuned in and you maybe saw a little bit of Nolan's, but really it's just about, obviously the title, Christ Over Fear, but it's targeting the combat veteran community, probably a community that you in your professional walk, are with quite a bit as well, and on the law enforcement side, but just really, we can, and I can't wait to talk to you and hear your journey on how you got into, the mental health work that you're doing professionally. But then coupling that with then the spiritual side of it, the spiritual aspect, being the foundation of all healing, I believe, and I won't speak for you, but I'm sure you probably agree, would be the ultimate healer in Christ, and Jesus as our Savior and as our healer and our great physician. And so to bring that more into the spotlight, I know mental health is a huge thing that everybody talks about nowadays, and I think that's awesome, breaking down walls, breaking down stigmas. But I also think that we could talk more about the Christ aspect of even mental health, and for the combat veteran community who maybe are on the fringes of that or don't know where to look for that, or they're so, they've got scars so deep that they don't want to go there right now. I'm hoping this can act as a conduit to that. So I guess in your work, Alton, and let's do that. I typically start it that way. Let's go back and let's just do your story a little bit, how you got to West Point's prep school out of Maryland, playing football there, and then your service in the United States Army, how you picked field artillery and what that looked like. And if you can sprinkle in there kind of your walk with Christ during that, because I know you were a man of faith even at West Point and during that time frame, but kind of the journey that Christ took you to get you to West Point. What did that look like?
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. I was raised in Maryland. My dad did some time in the military. And then, he also was a minister as an elder in the body of Christ. So I was introduced to the Lord young, right? But I think like most of us kind of had some, challenges and moving away from it, through high school and through college a little bit. So, for me, as I played football and did track and field in high school, I did pretty well my junior year and got some offers to attend like Duke and Temple and all that stuff, but then necessarily really wanted me to sign, right, and commit from that day on. Didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
As we all think, man, the next year will be better. Ended up a high ankle sprain, and kind of, West Point came in, Coach Bonamago came in, and kind of from that point, man, I was like, okay, let me think about West Point, and just came off a bowl game, so the rings and all that stuff, still Division I. Right. So ended up agreeing, and then they got me into the prep school. Really enjoyed that time, man, going through prep school, learning. In high school I was a halfback, shifted to just doing some halfback at the prep school, and then we went to fullback when I went to the academy. But as part of that, man, the journey and kind of understanding part of our call and purpose, man, like as you reflect, I reflect back on those times, is how God was preparing me for kind of what I do now, understanding mental toughness, but really understanding also how spirituality and your belief systems and all that kind of comes into your everyday life. So, my father ended up passing, I think you remember, in my sophomore year.
Yeah.
And, that was I think for me, that was a reawakening for Christ and understanding my faith, right? As we see in the Bible, we talk about our fathers and all them, like Abraham, Isaac, had the God of Abraham and Isaac. And for me, God, Jesus wasn't my God then yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Professed it, but really began to understand now that I had to pray. It was easy to call my father, call my mom, hey, I need y'all to pray for this, do this and all that. And it was kind of their responsibility. But after that, man, God began to transform me, right? And have me have that relationship with him. So, shortly after that, I had that issue with the WIPWE, right? That writing test. So I was turned back a whole year. So at the academy, I was turned back a year, but ended up graduating in December of 2002. But, during that time where, I had an extra semester, almost actually a year and a half of just being a cow again, right? Because I never really had a senior year or first year. I was a cow 2 years, and then they flipped me right before I graduated in 2002. So really being separated from my class, in between classes, I had to develop my leadership, my faith, my walk with God, man. And that kind of was actually instrumental in what I had to face later on, right? Going to Iraq, Afghanistan, being injured, God began to kind of walk with me different then. I was walking with him, having to hear his voice because I was separated from all my boys, everyone I used to hang out with, football team and all that. And it became a time of, as we see in the word, times of isolation, times of connection with the Lord. So that's kind of the catalyst that got me back into understanding and following Christ.
Wow. I mean, and I had forgotten about the whole you had to stay an extra semester and finish up on that front. And, just so the audience knows, you're a 4-year football player. And at that point in time, your eligibility was out. So you were no longer on the football team as well, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess with that, I mean, what would you say on that front? Because you used the word isolation, but to me, it sounded like you didn't necessarily use it in a bad term. I know sometimes isolation can be, there are times not to be isolated and cut off from everyone. But from there, what it reminded me of is, when Jesus here in his earthly walk would go and be by himself and kind of renew his relationship with his God, his Father. Is that almost, as you reflect back on it, is that kind of a little bit of what your journey was like in that last, I guess, the second half of 2001 and then all the way to December 2002?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely was. And for me, I had to sit out your senior season, and I had to play the next year.
Yeah.
So that was like the agreement that they would give me that year just to focus on the Whitby. So I came back and played that following year, the last year.
Yep.
And kind of finished out there and then finished and left. But, for me, definitely it was a time of solitude, man. Even though you're around familiar people, it wasn't that nucleus of, what we went through prep school. So, Brandon Dickens, Tyler Shee was my roommate, Paul Henderson, Lawrence Lewis, all them, right? There was kind of a separation, and it was really a preparation time for me, man, a solitude. And I kind of look back to that time as preparation, and that's how God's kind of prepared me in many other times throughout my life, since then, and even before then too, that I began to understand and can reflect on, so.
Yeah, which I think is cool because you sometimes we don't notice it in the heat of the moment, right? When we're so close to it, we're in it. But then also to your point that you can use that time and reflect back on that kind of when he showed up. I mean, I do that when I know that when you know that he showed up and was there, that can strengthen our faith for whatever trial we're currently walking through.
Sure.
And I guess, can you go to that then, Alton? Can you just tell us about your deployments and your experiences overseas, and then you getting injured and what that looked like as well?
Yeah, so I deployed to Iraq. So upon graduating, right, I had to have shoulder surgery. I think you remember my shoulders popped out.
Yep. All the time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, all those harnesses on.
Oh, man, I had Conan strap. So, graduating, man, I stayed up as a GA, but I had surgery and kind of got it fixed. So I was able to join 141 Infantry, and we deployed to Iraq in 2004, and kind of stayed there. Did the 12 months in Sadr City. We're fighting in Sadr City majority of the time, and then other parts of Baghdad. From there, obviously, there in Sadr City during that time, that was consistent contact all the time, man. So had a lot of combat experience there, saw things I think we all felt, things that we wish we probably never saw or had to deal with. Return, I had it was about 18 months in between. Got to go the captain's career course and then head back out to Afghanistan. And when I went out to Afghanistan, I got injured in Afghanistan. Then I was on a MIT team, but I was a brigade level BTT team, which was in southern Afghanistan in Helmand province. So there, got injured, man, and from that time got hit with a IED, so I had an open tib fib fracture, leg, almost lost my leg, had TBI, all those type of things, and from that point on, man, I had had to recover, right? So
yeah,
obviously riddled with post traumatic stress disorder, those type of things, and spent time at we went to Landstuhl, then I went to Walter Reed, spent some time there, about 8 months there recovering, making sure I could walk again. make sure I didn't lose leg, kind of rehab a little bit. Didn't do much in mental health, man, that whole time I was at Walter Reed, though. So, so leaving there, I'm dealing with the darkness and the cloud of that post-traumatic stress, the like, almost the loss that you kind of feel, even with my body not being the same, all
Mm-hmm.
those things, man, that I had to kind of deal with. And then, the kind of story begins, man. You go through that struggle, you go through the period of time where, purpose, you can't really find it. You don't feel it. It's behind these dark clouds, man, that I couldn't see what I was doing. I was just kind of getting through life every day. Was married, my wife, Lindy, we've been married for over 18 years. So we were
Mm-hmm.
married at that time, had my oldest son
Mm-hmm.
by that time too. So kind of walking through that, man. And, always we can go deep into that, but, just not
Yeah.
being able to be myself when I didn't feel like myself. TBI, I didn't have clear thoughts. I mean, it was a lot of things that were kind of coming together that culminated, man, in me and being able to see God clear again.
Yeah.
For me, man, it was, a desperation because, I knew the Lord before, man. And I understood, like, one thing that God gave me even through my dad's passing was he showed me his peace. Right. And I didn't have peace after, experiencing all those things, man. But I so desired to have his peace. Right. And part of his peace was just being able to live in no purpose and no joy. Right. I was so stunted in my emotional well-being, man. I could just be angry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Angry or maybe happy. There was nothing that I would identify in between. And that's most of the time what we see within post-traumatic stress. But part of that, man, I was reintroduced to prayer.
Mm-hmm.
A mentor that saw, like, he began to see, like, hey, I see you're struggling, you're quiet, you're like a shell of yourself. And he began to teach me how to labor in prayer, man. We would lay out and just pray. We would understand. This is Pastor Morale in Maryland. Taught me how to pray again, man, how to connect in a different way and how to kind of get through the cloud. But even during that time, God miraculously came in, man. I went to some training in Indianapolis. And in Indianapolis, man, part of my testimony is, I was there and I was going to this. I just walked into this Christian bookstore, and I was going through the store, just looking at books. Man, this old lady kept on following me in the store,
Mm-hmm.
and she was just saying, hey, I had my uniform on, and she was asking me, what are you doing here? I was like, well, I'm just here for training. And then she was pointing to a church across the street, and she was telling me that, hey, you should go over to the church. And I was like, I may, I only have a few days here for training. And I was like, I probably won't go. She's like, but you should go. I mean, literally she was following me through the store. And I was, all right. I was like, okay, fine, I'll go. And she was hassling, but we never know what encounter God has for us, man.
Right.
Not paying attention. So, finally I said, okay, I'll go. She's like, well, the service is tonight. I was like, okay, well, I guess you'll save me a seat. I'll sit beside you, I guess, since you invited me. She's like, well, I don't go to that church. It was so funny, man. So I was like, okay, well, I already said I would go. So I ended up going that night, man. And, I talked to the pastor when I came in, and he was saying, hey, man, it's good to see you. What can we pray for you for? And I was telling him, just a little bit about my story. And I was like, the clouds, man, they are so dark, right? Like, I think people will talk to us about, like, you can't see through it, right? It's just gloom and doom. And I was telling him about it, man. And he's like, okay. He's like, we're going to pray for you at the end of service. So at the end of service, he called for the mothers of the church. It was 3 ladies, older women. And he called them up front. He said, hey, we have this visitor here. Can you pray for him? He said he needs some healing to remove the clouds. And that night, man, the clouds were gone. That darkness of the clouds were gone. Right. And then I could be able to see this. I could see the sunshine, right? Like, I could see life. I could see hope. But that wasn't like the end of the story, though, right? That was just like the part of deliverance of that weighted cloud, the oppressive feelings. And from then on, I had to still walk through the symptoms of PTSD, but it was like a returning of hope that came, man. Like, so from that point, man, God kind of began to orchestrate and lead my story again, right? Clearly. So,
Man, that is powerful, Alton. And what time frame was this in? What year was this took place? Because 04 your trip is in Sadr City, and then you go Afghanistan. And what time frame is that? And then the time frame of the training in Indianapolis.
So I get back in, Afghanistan, Iraq, 04 to 05, and then,
Yeah.
Captain's career course. Beginning of 07, January, I went to Afghanistan.
Okay.
And then that story was probably 2008 or 9, beginning of 9.
When you were in Indianapolis.
Yeah, when I was in Indianapolis for
And
2
that was for your kind of your leg is a little bit more, you're healed up from that, but you were for like just a lack of just for detail, you were for like an army training, not for mental health treatment or anything like that.
No. So I was there after Afghan, my wife was already planning to go to medical school. So she had gotten into the Medical College of Wisconsin. So after getting injured, they were like, we can't put you anywhere. So they put me in recruiting command while I was still healing, still kind of going through my process. And then, so they sent me to Indianapolis, and that kind of happened there, man. So.
Okay. All right. Yeah. But it was not okay. And that's what I was curious on that front. And then I guess at that moment in time, like the darkness lifted and you could finally see, as you said, like the sunshine and see light.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, were the clouds, just for others, and as far as you want to go, you don't have to go super deep. You keep it at where you're comfortable, but like the clouds, was it specifically from Afghanistan, or was it from some of the stuff in Sadr City as well, or not even where you could really put a finger on what the darkness was at all?
Yeah, I mean, it was all of it, man. Like,
Okay.
When the tendency of, I'm mental health. So the
Yeah.
tendency of any of those negative cognitions that, kind of come up, right? Like you're unsafe, the world's unsafe, or I'm always in danger, all those type of things. It connects. It can be that major story that happened to me in Afghanistan, but it connected back to the times, of uncertainty in Sadr City, or even back to times growing up. So they all connect together. But I think, one of the things that really, really hit me at that time is I questioned God a lot. Right. And I think a lot of people I find and there's connections in post-traumatic stress, that it's actually a spiritual condition that needs to be addressed in order to fully heal from post-traumatic stress. We try to heal from physical, mental, emotional, but there's that spiritual component, and that spiritual component was not addressed for me, right? Because it's an existential issue.
Yeah.
Right. Most of the time it's dealing with life. So for me, already was following Christ, was a licensed minister at that time, then getting injured in Afghanistan, man, I began to question, God, how did you allow me to get injured? One, true, can you actually keep me safe? Right. And it's all those type of things, man. And us, man, military guys, we're going to try to double down on, hey, I'm gonna make sure my fighting position is secure. So I began to do that, man. And that's how we make our lives so small. Hey, I'm only gonna go places where I can really control what's going on and all those type of things, man. So someone through prayer, and then also through work, man, I was able to kind of address that existential question of can God really protect me and keep me and love me? All the things that he says in his word, could he actually do that? And work through it, man, was life changing, because you had to put it into the right context.
Yeah. What'd you say the work of doing that?
Mm-hmm.
How'd you do that, Alton?
Yeah. So for me was meeting with mentors and the mental, not the mental, but the pastoral role. So someone kind of teaching me different ways of different way of prayer, man. Laboring in prayer, and how that act can actually lift the darkness of the days, right? There's that literature about the darkness of the soul, or the darkest night. Those type of terminology it showed me how to lift it. But then also on the mental health side, I went through a prolonged exposure therapy, which it ended up being effective, but it was quite rough, man. So kind of
Yeah.
going through rehearsing the story and gaining some areas that I didn't even think about. And going through that process, man, it was also restorative for me. But it takes you willing to face the pain that you have inside, right?
Mhm.
And really walk through it, man, and
Yeah.
not just, go through the motions.
Yeah, or skirt around it or avoid it or get off of it very quickly, but actually sit on it and just allow for that to take place. Golly, man, Alden, thank you for coming on and just sharing all that because I think it's huge too that what you are, a licensed professional counselor now and on the mental health aspect, but for those out there to hear, okay, that's your that's your profession, that's what you do professionally, yet the spiritual component is what because I already said that on this show at the beginning. Like that's the whole purpose of wanting to have this show is because we can talk about Christ and be open about it and talk about it in a forum where we can have these deep conversations. I mean, what's your thoughts on moral injury? And I haven't really sat on it that much. There's a chaplain that I was with in West Palm Beach who started to introduce me to like moral injury with PTSD and what that looks like. But I think a lot of times that can be, and I don't know, I guess I'll ask the professional, what's your thoughts on that and tying it in with individuals who are experiencing PTSD as well?
Yeah, so moral injury is a big deal, right? The things that you're called to do sometimes on like you wartime, right? Or even like I work with the policemen that you may have to do in the line of duty. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not something that lines up morally with what you really think, right? Or you're asked to do something that is against your moral code, or even how you think about the sanctity of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those components, and then it's almost a breaking, like the injury, like so it's like an injury like we would face within our body, right? There may be a pull or strain or a breaking of a bone, and it's like a breaking of your moral compass or your moral laws that like kind of written on your heart or the way you live your life. And in that, man, like when it cannot be reconstituted in the same way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like after, if you've had to do something at war that you didn't necessarily want to, right? And I think we see the price, that we know the price of killing and other things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when that compass is broken, man, it's hard to say, okay, how do I now shoot the azimuth in which I, said I was going to live my life? So that moral injury sets that almost an impossibility, or along with PTSD, to say I can really trust my senses or my morals, or even people around me, my leadership, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's all those things, man. And so it affects the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, internal compass of people, and then the social aspect, interpersonal between people. So it impacts us in many ways, man. And if that question is not addressed, or that situation where you were maybe told to do something that you didn't want to do or knew was morally wrong, then if you don't answer that question, that's something that kind of just halts, and it sits
Mm-hmm.
in the back of your mind. It becomes a negative core belief that people can't be trusted. I can't be trusted. All these things that come into play.
Yeah, and I even like even taking it to like maybe even not that depth. I even think and taking it to, and this is a question because I ponder this and I'm like, I'm not school of hard knocks, I'm not a professional like you on masters and all of that, but I say like, I think about character development as well. And character development is a big one in the military at West Point. And a moral entry, I almost think like, say it's not a wartime life or death, something you take a life that you didn't mean to, and you're struggling with that, but just an area that checks your core beliefs and that you failed to do from a character standpoint, that I think that can almost sow the seeds of a moral injury, not to the extent of life or death, like I said, but like those little things. And it is hard. It's difficult in the military because then I feel like once an individual does that, I'll use me. Okay, I fall short of the character standard that the military places and I place on myself. But then who do I turn to share that with? Who do I turn to in a human standpoint to really open up and divulge that to? Maybe chaplains, maybe things of that nature. I don't know. Ultimately, there's only one that can reconcile that. In my opinion, that's Christ. Christ is the ultimate reconciler that can reconcile that. But I feel like it, for those who aren't there yet and those that don't have a relationship with Christ, I think that's where we sometimes put them out on an island a little bit, because it's a zero sum, and we put such a high standard on it, which I'm not saying it doesn't need to be, but I think we can quickly judge others who fall short of that standard, and then they don't have anywhere to turn to, and it only starts a darker, deeper cycle of, more and more flaws.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one area, man, you brought some great points out. I think one of the areas that I see it quite often, man, is, whether like you said, something that you strongly believe in or what you stand for, right? But one area that I commonly see it is when someone like us or a veteran or in their coping have committed adultery or done some of those type of things that they said they would never do, right? That are outside of the character portion. And it's hard to recover it, man, because it's something that's consciously, it's a reminder. And then where do you actually reconcile it? Right? That, hey, this is something that I said I would never, ever do. And I'm either practicing it or that's where I found myself.
Yeah.
It's hard to get out of that pit. So yes, it's not just like the other portions just from war, man. It's whenever you violate those commitments and those promises that you've made.
Well, and it just seems like it can be in a slew of things on all spectrums. It doesn't even have to be the combat veteran community as well, and I think that's where, we have to know where we can go for that ultimate source of reconciliation, to go to Christ on all of those fronts so people can go and dive into that. But I want to talk about too, so you kind of, I cut you off because I wanted to hammer you on like 80 questions there, but to go on you're at the church in Indianapolis, the elders pray over you. And then you weren't in like, hey, I'm going to pursue becoming a licensed professional counselor in mental health at that point. Were you? Like, how did you then get to there?
Yeah, man. So it was a progression, right? And kind of through my own healing, but really enjoy the part of the military I always enjoyed was being able to talk with soldiers and help them kind of figure out life's concerns and issues, even their future, where they wanted to go. So it began to, then I kind of went through my own healing processes and like, man, I would love to, I kind of felt that conviction. I would love to bring healing and all those things to people that have been through some trauma in their life. So it was a progression there. And then, prior to, I was simply going to just get out the military. I was like, man, because, part of the issue with my leg, man, I would start running on Monday and then it would kind of swell up, right? And it'd still be swollen up through Thursday. So it was that kind of issue just because of the trauma that I had received from it. So I was thinking about getting out, man. And then someone, I think the lawyer, in my unit was like, hey, you need to go through a med board before you even put in any papers. So in that process, man, I was in the med board process for about, I think it was somewhere like 18 months, man, something like that. So at the very beginning, I started in the master's program and I was like, man, this is kind of where I think I feel God leading me toward a counselor. I always had that thought about, hey, I think this would work for me. I've enjoyed it and it wouldn't be hard work. So kind of going in that vein, man, got my master's as I was leaving the military. And then I began to work in Austin in Samaritan Center, where I was working with justice involved veterans, those that had either gotten kicked out or were done with their service and gotten involved with the law. Right. Either through coping, the way they cope through drugs, alcohol, other illegal activities, and then landed them into some trouble. So was able to work with the trauma initially, man. And then from there, I started my own practice and kind of been practicing it ever since.
Yeah, man. And then tell us about Belton Police Department too. You do, are you their chaplain still in that front?
Yeah, so they used to have just one chaplain. So I was the chaplain for a while, man, and in the midst of it, I just decided to help kind of build a team. So now
Uh-huh.
there's five of us, like within our community, pastors and lay members within bodies, but licensed with as chaplains. And we go in, we not only tend like inward facing, tend to the officers, we also tend to our community in these events too. So definitely been enjoying that, man. I was asked by our police chief Ellis here, some was it maybe 6 years ago, I think, something
Mm-hmm.
around there, to come join the team, and then he asked me to be the chaplain. Prior to that, he had a organization of, it was a police clergy partnership that he would brief us and talk through issues, and then he from there our relationship developed, and he just saw that we could work together and improve.
Mm-hmm. And what have you seen? What have you seen the similarities of like law enforcement and military and that community? Because I know um, I've seen actually, I think a lot of times it can be even more difficult because we knew when we were going into harm's way overseas and when that was going to be a challenge, and it was, and I don't like using compartmentalize, and that's another question for you. I guess men can compartmentalize and do compartmentalize sometimes for healthy and rightful purposes to be able to focus on the task at hand, but then you can compartmentalize so much that you're not open to the here and now and everything that you got to hold on to. And I guess I say that because law enforcement, they can compartmentalize when they head off to work, but then they're coming home immediately that night or whatever their shift is. I think can be even more challenging. What do you see a similarity in what the challenges of what they went through versus what military and veterans have experienced in their service?
Yeah, for sure, man. And I think there's some differences there, but there's a lot of similarities. Like, one of the things that I pay attention to as I train, the police officers, and then also their families, is the families have to, every day when their law officer is leaving their house, it's a I need to make sure that I'm leaving in on a proper note, right? Because the potential is there any day to be in anything that could actually potentially take their life. So it's that different, man, being able to say goodbye every day and not knowing if it's the last time or not, right?
Yeah.
Which is it's a heavy price that they're paying to do that. And then the things that we're seeing, man, and kind of I talk from it from both sides, right? Some of the police brutality that we see, some
Yeah.
of the undue use of force, excessive force, those type of things, man. And then on the other side is like how media portrays, or how some culture kind of looks at policemen. So it's a culmination of all of that, man. And
Yeah.
being able to work on the spiritual side of it, like the spiritual fitness with the law enforcement officers, man, has been key, right? Because and that's kind of what I'm working on in my like my dissertation area is that, man, how do you bring spirituality, or the spiritual component of wellness to life, right? We've talked
Hmm.
about, we do these things, but how do you actually make the rubber hit the road, and what are the techniques, interventions that you can ensure that spirituality is coming in? So for them, man, like law enforcement usually are never really dealing with people or the citizens of their community on their best days. It's usually on their worst days.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the nature of that, man, it's taxing on well-being and on the soul, on the spirit. You have to have something that kind of continues to regenerate hope
Yeah.
and faith in them, right? Like in law enforcement, if you're dealing with people, just the worst parts of people a lot of times, or the hard parts of people a lot of times. So how do you do that? How do you reconstitute hope as often as possible? And I think
Hmm.
that's the connection for us that have served, right? Like when we think about maybe the things that we've experienced, the traumas and all those things, man, how do you reconstitute hope again back in your life? And it has to
Hmm.
be a continuous process, man. And that's the spiritual interventions that we have to do.
Well, and can you take that and that dissertation that you're working on, or I don't know how far along it is, but my question is, what could you do for like a West Point or even basic training in AIT? Could you take that? What's your thoughts on this and do something on the spiritual aspect prior to putting men and women of our military into harm's way, or we're, almost as a preventative measure rather than reactionary post after something's happened. What have you ever thought about that, or what do you think about that front of trying to address the things prior to happening rather than afterwards?
Yeah, and I think our military's kind of got the grasp of it now with the spiritual fitness as it being a readiness measure, kind of that
Mm-hmm.
they're doing, and they're trying to hit it to the ground. But definitely, right? Like, so when we talk about spirituality, we're talking about like the spiritual component. It deals with how you view the world, like, and as we think about, anybody that's come from kind of where we've walked, is how do we view suffering? How do we view violence? Like undo wrongs, all these different things. How do we view it? And if we view it as like, suffering shouldn't happen, or it does happen, or everybody suffers, it kind of it changes our beliefs and those things that are kind of concerning. So really tying, looking at purpose, which it can be part of the beliefs and the emotional side, but it's sits in the spiritual, right? Do I have a purpose of why I'm doing this work every day? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And how often do I actually tie back to the individual purpose and maybe a collective purpose on what I'm doing, even on what I'm living on? So I think for us as veterans, man, that's hard to do a lot of times. If it's, if maybe your work isn't really tied to a purpose, or feeling like this is a calling,
Mm-hmm.
like there's nothing else I would do. This is what I feel I was created to do, right? Those components are really important, and how it's tied to it. So from the very get-go, man, going back to purpose and understanding of why you're doing it. It's not just I think about West Point initially, it was about football, man, and then it had to be about leadership and leading our greatest resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
People.
Yeah.
And that had to change at a point, and that time of solitude for me, that changed it a whole bunch, man. Like,
Yeah.
when football was kind of taken away, and I had to kind of focus on, why are you here? Why are you going through this? And us kind of starting from the very beginning, from that point of like, man, how do you tie to your purpose, and what is actually your purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of go into the sacred, the significant, the other parts of spirituality.
And so the military is doing that now then.
Yeah, they're developing it now. So I do some work with the Chaplain Training Center on Fort Hood.
Mm-hmm.
Train, and one of my partners in my business works there, and training the chaplains on how to not only do the counseling portion, but also how do you integrate the spirituality into therapy, right? Like, and as we think about it, like, a lot of the trauma happens to our body, right? We have a feeling that's kind of concerned, like that's associated with that. And then our beliefs kind of come in. But that
Mm-hmm.
next component of spirituality, of how I interpret my world, how,
Mm-hmm.
that all that, we don't dress that well. So kind of going to that next step of, how do I address that and make sure that question of existence is answered, and not left unanswered and kind of just floating, or
Yeah.
crisis. Yeah.
Or what now? I didn't hear the last part
or
on.
or it being in crisis, right?
Okay.
I see a lot of that existential crisis where, man, I don't know how I should live anymore, or I
Mm-hmm.
don't really understand or really believe what I used to believe is true. Right. So when I was saying I was having those questions about God, is those are existential crisis questions. Right. And we identify those, right? Like, and it can happen in marriage. Like, I used to say our marriage was sacred, or I used to, whatever those questions. And if they're not truly answered, then you're still going to have that instability and unrest. And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what I'm finding in my work.
Okay. How do you do this? Is a personal question. Not that this isn't all person, but how do you, because, you know, the, just the experiences, the stories that you're hearing and, people sharing that, what do you do to maintain, much like the law enforcement, you're saying, hey, law enforcement, they're seeing individuals, at their worst, or going through the most challenging circumstances of their time. Typically, that's when they're encountering the citizen. It's not to call to say, hey, I'm having a great day, come over for coffee, right?
Yeah.
Um, but to a certain extent, that's the same for you, and the heaviness of what you're hearing. How do you maintain your spiritual fervor to ensure that you're your spirituality is not being, I guess for other mental health professionals out there who are dealing with that, what do you suggest
Yeah.
those courses of action are?
Yeah. So the first thing, man, I always have to revisit and continue to revisit my purpose. Like, I feel God has called me to this, and
Mm-hmm.
whether it's always doing the counseling or training others to do it, I definitely feel like this is part of my life's work. So, counseling and ministry, you can put them on the same, they're the same thing,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
in many aspects, but asking, kind of going back to that all the time, even in the hardest days, hey, God actually called you to this. Reminding myself it's not too hard because God has actually equipped you and told you and strengthened you in the process and then giving you a history of it, right? But you also have to have boundaries in that, right? Knowing the
Yeah.
times that you need downtime, not times that are not. And that was one of the reasons why I kind of created a team of chaplains. I can't respond to all that and counseling and all that. So have
Right.
a team around you to do it. And then I think one of the bigger things is, you having a place like I think the greatest thing about the gospel, man, is the exchange that Christ did with us.
Mm-hmm.
He took our filthiness and our sin and our depravities, and he took them and put them upon himself. And then he said, I'm now going to assign my righteousness to you. And that gift of exchange, man, is the greatest thing that we could ever have. So for me, practically, I try to practice that gift of exchange every single day
Mm.
or every other day, man. And that for me is like laying down, like prostrate and just praying
Yeah.
and saying, God, these are the things that I've encountered today, or you already know what I'm going to encounter today before I leave, or, this week, or getting those things off of me and actually exchanging them, saying, Lord, I ask you to take this. I just need your righteousness. I need your peace, and I need your joy. Right. And it actually beginning to work in your nervous system, works in your body, and kind of having that continued thing for me. And there's
Mm-hmm.
three things, man. So I was a field artillery officer, kind of went into targeting and all those things, man. And CDE, right? The man, it just slipped my mind. But you are what I'm talking about, the collateral damage estimation, right?
Okay. All right. All right.
And
Hey,
we had,
you're getting into field. I was an infantry guy. Come on, Alton. Like
yeah,
I don't. I'm
we
like,
had to work that for y'all, man. We had to work those math problems for you. So
yeah, come on. I was like, what? That blow it up. Go.
so we would limit the damage, right? And
Yeah.
so part of what I'm I've kind of been thinking about, man, and knowing is that we as believers have to understand those three things, right? And it means different things, what I'm trying to say, but we have to find counsel. So the first C is counsel. We have to find deliverance, right? And deliverance through prayer, deliverance through people praying for us,
Mm-hmm.
confessing and all that stuff. And then the third part is education, man. We have to understand what we are fighting against, right? The weight and the presence of like the emotional side of things, but also like we know that there's an enemy that's fighting against us, the
Yeah.
demonic stuff, right?
Right.
So you have to have the education, and those three things kind of allows me to continue on and doing what I do is counsel, deliverance, and education.
Man, I like that. I want to write that down real quick. CDE, and you use that from a field artillery acronym, huh?
Yeah, from a targeting. Yeah,
Counseling, and then deliverance too. It makes me think, and I don't know, you could agree or disagree, but sometimes on that deliverance, like my pastor down in Florida, when we were down in Florida, he used to have like a prayer cards, and I started doing. It makes me now think I need to get back into doing this. But like he would write his prayers out on a 3x5 card, and he'd go through them, whatever he was praying about, and then whenever that prayer was answered, he would annotate that, write the date and like how it was answered. And he would keep those so that in the future, when he was praying about something else, whatever, he could go back to those deliverance when it was delivered to grow and to maintain his faith. And I thought that was such a powerful way. And I do have some, but I need to add to them now. But I think like, would that be an example of deliverance?
yeah, that would be an example of deliverance, man. And then there's also the component, man, depending on your experience, right? Like some also like people lay hands and
Yeah.
rebuke like a spirit of depression or remove whatever those things that are ailing. So that's what I was saying. Like, and those are things that God said that we can actually pray for, and that they will leave us, they will move us, they will
Yeah.
give us deliverance. So as we look at the scriptures and see what God was doing when he was taking everybody out of Egypt, he was providing deliverance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And removal, and that's like an example too of going through the Red Sea, as we say, is baptism, but it's
Yeah.
also the removing and stripping away of things that have plagued us too. So kind of that aspect, man, making sure that we bring in prayer and those that are operating in spiritual gifts too.
Yeah. With how much wisdom you have, I mean, and what you're doing with your company, and then I guess with the police department, but I mean, are you an ordained pastor as well then, or what's the, or ordained minister, I guess you said you were?
Yeah. So licensed minister is what
Licensed
I am.
minister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I was doing FCA and then doing ministry prior, I was kind of focused a lot within the church or just the body. And now I have a community counseling center, and my wife's a doctor of physical therapy. So our goal is to do a mind body type of
Okay.
business, expand to it, man. Just because trauma hides in the body, man.
Yeah.
And then it hides in your mind from the body.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big connection. But like that ministerial side is, for me, is being realized whether I'm talking to a Christian or a non-Christian,
Yeah.
right? Healing and bringing freedom is what we're called to do in Christ, right? So that's kind of the ministerial side, and I still do church ministry, but my focus has kind of been marketplace and just bringing that to everybody in ways that we're not talking about it. Like, so part of what I'm doing a lot of research on is creating spiritual literacy. Even though we're believers in Christ, man, we don't understand. We were having some difficulties in understanding spirituality, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are we actually? How do we restore it? How do
Mm-hmm.
we strengthen it? How do we actually measure whether our spirituality is good or not? So some of those areas, man, because I've had to face that, man. Like personally, just through my story, I had to face it, right? I had to face
Yeah.
it through those that I work with, and one thing, man, that really drives me, and that's why I kind of what came with the CDE was, man, I had gotten so deep in the pit, right? Where, and people can identify with it, is that, man, I could just sit in dark rooms and be off in space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And, I could get angry, like, the joy of having children, right, is your real joy.
Yeah.
But the sounds that they would make, man, could drive me into chaos,
Yeah.
drive me into fits of rage, things like that, man, that just makes your soul hurt, right?
Yeah.
So I was deep in that, man. So at one point in the spiritual realm, like thinking about prayer, thinking about God, thinking about wanting to be free,
Mm-hmm.
a mantra that kind of came, that I live by, man. At all costs, I need to be free, right?
Yeah.
Like, and in that, man, that would drive you to a place of humility, right? One thing that I've learned about trauma sometimes lends itself to pride. So if you don't answer that existential question, you kind of put yourself in the place of God and saying, I can keep myself safe. I
Mm.
can deliver my future. I can right every wrong. And believers of Christ, man, we're doing the exact opposite of what
Yeah.
we're supposed to do. But trauma, because it's been unresolved, lends to us developing that in ourselves, man, and become more self-reliant, that it becomes on how I cope and all these things. And God's saying, I mean, I can work with this. I
Yeah.
can show you peace again. But how do we do that? We got to understand a little bit more about the spiritual component. How is my spiritual bank restored, right? Because it's always being stripped from
Mm-hmm.
memories, from the trauma, for law enforcement, from what they encounter. But how do I build it back up? So that's kind of what I've been working on, man. My focus.
That's well, and what you shared about, I know that that's an area, and when somebody says something like that, like you do, or another person, another guest, I like to, I don't know if I want to say I like to do this, but I want to amplify that, because I know there's going to be somebody else who's watching at a certain point and it's like, oh man, that's something, that, Alton just said that I struggle with now. And I struggle with that for years. And I can't say that I'm removed from it at all, is like little kid noises throughout the house, like loud. And I believe it's from overseas and just being exposed to that constantly and turning it up because of what we were doing every single night on, on those direct action missions, and having that noise, and it brings it back. But you mentioned it, I've mentioned it, I know others have mentioned it, and I want people to know, I mean, there's relief. I can sit in it now. I can acknowledge, like, all right, I'm safe, they're safe, we're all safe. Hey, they're having a good time. They're being kids. That's what they're supposed to do. But I have to also, mentally and I would go as far as saying spiritually prepare for it and know, like, all right, there's going to be a bunch of kids over. Like, let me prepare for this. Let me be, present minded to know that it's going to get loud and that's okay. Yeah. So I say that just because you had mentioned it too, and I just want others to know if they're experiencing that, that's okay to be experiencing. That's part of the response that we have. But there is, there can be relief in it when we go in and actually share about it. And to your point too, we can be surrounded by family. We can be surrounded with our wives and our kids and all that, but we can still be very isolated and shut off from them because we don't emotionally and physically and spiritually, we don't share anything with them ever. Yeah. So I think that's something that you just mentioned too, about, when you could be in a dark room or whatever, like we can shut off the silos of everyone. And, but we can still be surrounded. I don't want people to think, oh, well, I live with my family and I got everybody, I'm not isolated. No, we can mentally isolate ourselves pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard, many veterans kind of talk about this, and those active duty men talk about, how we actually live or we kind of experience our families. Most of the time we are, whether it's because we're shut down or we can't handle some of the interactions, it's the safest place feels like you're on the porch and your whole front of your house is a window pane and you're looking in and you see the joy, but you can't actually be in there. Right.
Yeah.
And many people have kind of described it as that way, is that they wish they could be inside and right. And for me, that's part of our nervous system that we have to re-regulate, right? That I can be inside and feel the joy, understand it, and not be thinking just of safety or just of security, but joy, peace, and enjoying the laughter of our kids, I think.
Absolutely.
And one other thing I would ask or kind of say to Chad, I know we kind of going on time, but a lot of my healing too, man, was kind of brought on by my spouse.
Yeah.
Right? Lindy, man, just like the backside for her, man, is her really praying for me, laboring for me in prayer, being able to call me out when I wasn't living according to what, we had talked about when we first got married, right? Even through the trauma, man. And how a lot of times part of our healing is how we go and work and try to heal our spouses too, right? Because they carry a heavy load, man. Seeing like, my wife would describe it as like, man, this strong man that I used to know when I married, man, because of this trauma, has almost become into someone that has been captured by trauma.
Yeah.
And in the prison, right? And sitting in a corner. But yet you used to be alive and strong and willing to face every obstacle. And just the prayer of my wife, the encouragement, man, and bringing me, especially in those days after being injured, right? Nursing back to health and all those type of things, man, is you can't put a price on a spouse that is committed to the Lord, man, and committed to going to bat for you. So that area, man. But I think for us, after you've just like the Lord told Peter, is after you've been converted, go and restore your brothers. It's us now that have gotten through the darkest parts of that journey. How do we go back and help restore our wives or our spouses during that time, man? So just want to kind of say that because I see that within the work, but I also see it in my own story, is I've had to kind of go back and say, I know you've carried the weight spiritual weight, the weight of having Christ over all the fears and traumas that I've experienced. And now let me take that burden, or kind of help you be restored.
Oh man, amen on that, dude. And I tell you what, how many of us that are sitting here today, and it's like Emily, she's the one who brought me deeper in my faith in Christ, and it was watching her, and it was watching and seeing how she lived her life. And to your point, I love what you said. Is she would call you out on it, and I think sometimes it can go where it's like such a caregiver role where it's not necessarily healthy to be doing everything for the veteran or for, whoever, law enforcement or active duty. It's not making it easier. It's actually calling them out, quite frankly, on the BS at times.
Yeah.
And I think that is awesome. I mean, what a woman of faith to have the, the chutzpah, if you will, to be like, no, like this is your responsibility. But like then to be and walk that side. Yeah. I think that's awesome. And you're absolutely right. What a blessing that is in so many of our lives, whether they have recognized it yet or not. And if they haven't, or they walk through it, to then go back to your point and share in that burden, carry that burden even for them then, so that they can renew their spiritual fire as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Alton, we are at the hour mark, man. I don't want to keep you anymore, but I do, man. I thank you for coming on. I mean, all of the things that you're able to talk about, from, the Christ aspect, from the mental aspect, from living it and the journey that you were on, dude, it means a ton to me that you were able and willing to come on here and just be you and to see you. So thank you for coming on. I love you, man.
Thanks for having me, man. Love you too, brother.
All right. I'll see
what you're doing.
All right, man. You too.
Yep.
All right. I'll see you.
All right.
All right, folks. Hey, that was episode 23 of Christ Over Fear. Today, July 6, 2022, with Alton McCallum. What a great story, and what just wisdom and knowledge that we can have, and we can glean from that conversation with Alton. So I think it's awesome. And I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, continue to fight the good fight. Thanks. Bye.